Most people think that I started in dentistry 27 years ago when I graduated dental school. But the truth is, my first exposure to a dental office happened about 47 years ago when I was 4 years old. How? My dad's office. My father, Dr. Allan Krieger, is today's guest. He's been an inspiration to me my entire life. He's guided me in so many ways and has allowed me to achieve what I achieve today. Hey there, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Orthopreneurs Podcast. Now, today I have a very special treat, even more of a treat for me than for you. But today I have Dr. Krieger. Well, you'd say that's me. Well, this is the original Dr. Krieger dentist. So I'm proud to present to all of you my father, Dr. Allan Krieger, who's taught me so much about life and practice. And I figured some of the lessons I've learned and some of the stories he has would be amazing for us to listen to. So, Dad, welcome to the Orthopreneurs Podcast.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm totally honored by that introduction, and I don't know if there's anything I can add to that.
Well, it was wonderful having you on.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
It was great being here.
Yeah, and say hi to Mom and have a great evening.
You too.
Yeah, thanks. I want to just start because I want to treat this like any other podcast, because out there, on average, we have about 1,500 people who listen to each episode. And I just want to start a little bit, but like I do with everybody, by just, and I know your story, obviously, but if you want to talk a little bit about your story from a dental perspective, training, practices, and how you got to here, I'd appreciate it. And just like one of our favorite scenes in The Princess Bride, when he tells him, remember, this is for posterity. So please be honest.
Of course.
So Dad, tell me, if you don't mind, and tell everybody out there, why dental school as opposed to, say, growing up in the 40s and 50s in New York, plumber, electrician, very honorable trades. But I'm guessing Grandma and Grandpa weren't thrilled with the idea of you not being a professional?
Yeah, basically that was the common modality at that particular time for parents, certainly in our socioeconomic parameter.
Jews.
Yes, Jews. Good.
Jews.
Yeah.
Our socioeconomic parameter.
That's right. They wanted the best for their children.
So you knew you wanted to be a professional. Why? I mean, we all knew a million people who were accountants, attorneys, physicians. Why dentistry?
Well, I think dentistry was really a second choice. The first choice was medicine, but I soon discovered in high school, in reality, that I had a phobia for blood, and I know it sounds funny at this time because you've seen me do surgery.
Right,
okay?
I'm laughing.
And
because your favorite thing on earth is surgery.
Yes, it was. I found that to be one of the most relaxing areas of dentistry. Perhaps it was the training that I received when I was in the United States Army Dental Corps. But at that point in my life, going back to when I was 16, 17 years of age, I truly had a phobia against blood. And somebody told me you can be a dentist and there's no blood. Well, so I believed them until I got into my second year of dental school and had to do a rotation in oral surgery. And, the amazing thing, didn't faze me.
Right on.
Gave my injection and started taking out a +3 mobility tooth. And that's what we were allowed to do back in those days at Temple Dental School. And the rest is history.
So I know some of your best stories, which is why I wanted you to be here today. So I want to direct it a little bit towards the difference in the dental education that I got in the late 80s, early 90s. And I'm not counting my orthodontic, just dental to dental, versus the discussions that you and I have had about what you went through and leaving out sort of the racial or religion prejudicial folks who might have been in the mix, because we can find them in any generation. I know that when I come home and tell you that, my dental school experience was like, we all had chairs, we had instructors who, some weren't the nicest, but certainly some were a little more challenging, or not, and some were nice. Tell us some of the fun stories about, like, I remember about having to hold up a mirror, right?
Yes. Temple Dental School, particularly in the operative department, as I recall, as well as the prosthetic department, to obtain the attention of one of the floor inspectors, to gain acceptance to move on with patient care, you literally raised your mirror. We didn't have lights on top of chairs or stuff like that. It was no lights. It was old technique. Did we have an examining light? Of course. But I'm talking about any kind of system where you had the ability to inform the instructors or professors, that you needed their assistance. The method was to raise your mirror and
like hold up your hand, like
the
arm.
Statue of Liberty. And sometimes you felt like the Statue of Liberty until somebody came over to you. And you had certain professors and instructors who had an axe to grind for whatever reason, real nasty human beings. And if for some reason they wanted to take it out on you, they did. It was, for many of the students, it was an extremely trying and difficult situation. Some of them eventually literally cracked under the pressure that was being exerted upon them by callous teachers who should have known better and should never have really been teaching. Because the care for their own profession was so lacking. Very, very. It was a very bad taste for many, many students. I remember in my class we had at least 5 students out of my class who never got past the second year.
How many did you have in your class?
If I remember correctly, we started off with a class of 130. Temple was a rather large dental school during the 60s, the early 60s when I was attending. And we started off with a class of about 130. And generally we graduated 120. We had 4 female students on day one in 1962. 4. There wasn't one female dental student graduating with my class. They had all failed out.
Wait. I suspect, obviously, that they were as smart and as intelligent and as capable as anybody in the room. When you say they failed out, does that really mean that they were failed out? That were the powers that be conspiring against the ladies in some way?
It could very well be. It was not a situation that was equitable. You just didn't have, the same makeup of students that you have today. And I really don't believe that the instructors wanted to change that.
But I want to move on just a tiny drop, because I got so many things I want to ask you. And one more fun story that I think everybody out there will really appreciate is you had no dental chairs. You had to work on patients standing up, right? And you could only get a chair if you had a doctor's note.
That is exactly true. In certain departments, the operative department, the prosthetic department, you couldn't sit. We were not taught sit-down dentistry. We were not taught four-handed dentistry at that time. I was very, very fortunate to have gone to dental school during the tremendous transition period, believe it or not, between high speed, between low speed and high speed, between all of the new materials that were coming on to the into use for impression materials. I mean, I started off taking copper tube impressions for crowns.
I know.
Okay.
You taught me.
Yep. And it was the best training I ever got.
This is just a quick little side note. The whole family is very proud of the fact that you served in the dental corps, the Army Dental Corps. And that I was born while you were serving in Chicago. Would you, I mean, it's hard to extrapolate to today's date. Was your experience in the Army as a dentist a good one? Would you recommend it to others?
I would absolutely, wholeheartedly suggest and promote a residency program to any dental student at the time of their graduation. Okay, there's not enough time, there's not enough patient experience to really go into your own practice, okay, when you graduate from dental school. Okay, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force Dental Corps that existed back in the 1960s, okay, was a tremendous learning experience. It was a tremendous avenue where you can learn a great deal about actually practicing, so that when you literally went into your own practice or associated with someone, you had the experience and the wherewithal that you knew what you were doing.
Right? You came out to New York and you were working out there. So he was your first big job, right?
He was my first real job. And I can't say he was my mentor. Okay. I think I mentored him.
So you come out of the Army Dental Corps and you go to work in New York. You move back to New York because of family. That's where your mom and your dad and your sister were. How many? By the way, you never mentioned, how many years did you practice dentistry from the day you graduated till the day you retired?
I practiced probably close to 40, 45 years.
Okay. So you have a lot of perspective, more than most out there. What advice would you give people and tell the story about Ralph, about when you went to work for him? What did you learn about your first real associate position, and what advice would you give to people out there who are thinking of bringing an associate in based upon that?
Well, I would hope that anyone who's listening to this will never go through the experience that I had working with and for Ralph. Okay, he should rest in peace. Okay, because Ralph was...
And by the way, I want to just make it clear to everybody out there that in my family, my dad, my mom, my family, they could talk about anybody any way they want, as long as they finish it with, may they rest in peace.
Absolutely.
He was such a terrible human being. May he rest in peace.
Right. I didn't say he was a terrible human being. Okay.
I know. But here in the South, in Texas, and along the rest of the South, they'll typically say, God bless their little heart.
Okay.
So I just want to make it clear to everybody that may he rest in peace.
But I'm not sure that Ralph had a heart. But in any case,
may he rest in peace.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So keep going, if you don't mind.
Now, your listeners will be very interested in trying to close their eyes for a second and picture the following. Okay, you are in a brand new area as far as you're concerned. Okay. And you see in front of you 10 operatories. And in those operatories are at least 10 patients, okay? And you have a hallway filled with patients waiting to go into these operatories, okay? And you have various doctors who are running around like their heads are not even connected to their shoulders. And you have a guy screaming and hollering, okay, I need my forceps. Did you take care of room number 1, etc.? How many patients are waiting? All at the same time. Okay?
Absolute pandemonium. This
was what I saw on day 1 when I went for an interview with Ralph. Why? Because Ralph, at the time, 1968, was at the right place at the right time for the beginning of what you can refer to as socialized dentistry. The Medicaid program had just been unrolled.
What lesson did you learn working for him that you wouldn't repeat later on your associates?
The most important single lesson I learned was to treat every other dentist who was working with me, for me, etc., to treat them as an equal. Okay, Ralph didn't know that lesson. Okay, we were all kegs on spokes on a wheel. All we did was produce. Okay, we produced dentistry that he billed out and he got paid for. Okay, and we earned a percentage of what we, quote, produced.
But wouldn't you agree that there are many out there who would say, look, I hired you to be a dentist, work for me, you do your job, I'll make sure you get paid every 2 weeks or how often it is. I don't need to treat you nicely, just work. I'm not going to treat you badly, but you know what? You work for me, get going.
The answer is probably yes, but I was looking for more out of a relationship. I wanted a relationship. I didn't want to come in the morning and literally start practicing and leave at night, and that's it. I didn't really want to have that. I was young. I had loads of energy. I wanted to help people as much as I could. I also wanted to earn a living, and I wanted camaraderie, friendship, and I wasn't being offered those things initially by Ralph. It was only after I was with him maybe for 3 months or so that I gained his trust because he saw what I really could do, and I literally offered him the opportunity to say, look, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you don't know how to manage. You know, give me a chance. Let me manage your office here. And he did, and it worked out very, very well.
So I'm going to fast forward a little bit because there's so many good facets to your story. You ended up moving out to Long Island later on. I know a little bit longer, probably about 5 years later, you moved out to Long Island, but you set up you were working in a practice and I guess I want to go back. Actually, I'm going to go backwards for just a second. I want to go on a broader topic here and I'm really curious to see the answer I get because you and I have never talked about this ever. Talk to me if I was a 35-year-old orthodontist, right? Because it doesn't really matter. Coming out of school right now, and you know my partnership, but let's leave that out of the whole mix right now. If you're a 35-year-old orthodontist who sits down for a cup of coffee with Dr. Allan Krieger and says, you know, I'm thinking I'm going to look for a partner. You've been through some partnerships in your life. I'm not going to comment if they were good or if they were bad. I'll let you comment in any way you want. But what advice would you give people out there if they were looking for a partnership?
Well, I think the question is an excellent one because, as you did say, I did go through experiences like that. I think, first of all, to pick a partner, you need to have someone who, number one, is compatible with you. It means that you have the same goals in mind. Okay, if you have an opportunity to select someone who's diametrically opposed to your value core, okay, don't even go any further. Okay, it'll never work out. Okay, so that's number one.
So you mean somebody whose core values are just different than yours?
If they're diametrically different, okay, if you have a person who has absolutely no desire to help people, but is in the field to make money, and that's his only drive or her only drive, okay, and you are the type of person who is a professional. You care about taking care of people. You care about making sure that their health is taken care of properly, okay? And that person who's your potential partner does not share that same interest, okay? I would not have a partnership relationship with that person, okay? That's number one. Number two, I think you have to have the same drive and the same desires. If somebody comes from a very wealthy background and really doesn't need to work that hard, okay, they may not be your cup of tea. If you're the type of person that I know you are, and you know the kind of person that I've been, okay, we're both driven. We're both driven for excellence, and we're both driven to take care of human beings and to be very, very proud of our profession. If you find
Yeah,
somebody who doesn't share those values with you, okay, no matter what else they may bring to the table, is going to be a sour partnership and it'll never last. So those are the things I would stay away from. I'd get to know the person
nice.
who wants to be your partner. Okay, that's the important thing. It's almost like finding a mate. Okay, you have to be
Yeah,
compatible. You have to be able to work together. You have to be able to bounce ideas off each other and gain some positive feelings. If you end up being miserable, okay, because your partner doesn't want to do things the way you think they should be done, your partnership is doomed. It'll never work out.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't disagree. And you've seen my partnership with Doug. You know, we've known each other now for, oh gosh, 7 years plus at this point. And I can't say that we've ever major disagreement on anything yet. And you've had a chance to meet him. And you know, I'm leery of partnerships because I grew up in the dental world and I saw partnerships go south. Um, and I'm just blessed to have Doug because he is. We share core values, we share drive, and Lord knows neither
But
one of us are
you guys
wealthy.
are compatible. There's no doubt about it. I've seen both of you in action, okay, and you have a good time, and that's the best part of having a partnership, okay? Having a good time, sharing the best, okay? Because sometimes it's not the best, and you have to live through those periods as well, okay? Not being able to make payroll or not being able to do something that you'd like to do financially, etc. You get past that, okay? And if you can get past that and everything else works out the way it should be, you have a perfect partnership.
Yeah, they say everybody can get along well when there's money, but when the lean times come, you know, what really happens? And there were times when Doug and I graduated residency together, and we had no idea how we were going to make payroll. We had no idea how we were going to pay our mortgages or our rent on our homes. And yet, you know, we just kept, you know, sort of looking up together and saying, this is going to work out. He really supported me by his corporate work while I was building the first practice. And then the practice I'd built supported him to get out of his corporate job. So, you know, the old adage, you got to take one for the team.
That's right,
Um,
but that's a good partnership.
so let's just get past partnerships for just a second, because I think that's some great advice you gave. But the interesting thing about your life and your practice life, and what really intrigues me, is you really live both sides of the private practice model, or actually just the practice model. You had a boutique fee for service practice early in your career, and you moved to the insurance based, bigger volume type model later in your career. And you really had a DSO back in the 80s when DSOs hadn't really been existed yet. You know, the Wisdom Tooth Center for Dentistry, right?
Yes,
Um, at its peak had what, 5 offices?
we had three.
Well, I thought you had one in Comac, one in Lindenhurst, one in Babylon, and one in
We had
Bayside.
four. That's correct.
Right. And I thought maybe there was a fifth, but so you had 4 offices back at a time when pretty much nobody had started doing the DSO model short of a few people. But you weren't really a DSO. But I was really impressed with the way you and your partners really developed the business model, going into businesses and speaking to HR, so to speak, i.e., union
Yes.
leaders, and asking them and saying, "Hey, we accept this insurance plan. You know, why don't you consider sending your patients to us?" Um, but early in your life, early in your career, you did the private practice model. So, kudos for and I was saying kudos for doing something that nobody else was doing at the time, but you did it nicely, right? Because nowadays most DSOs are faceless corporations. that do it based on just pure money. You were always so respectful and so kind and so nice to your patients. You might have been getting half the price of the private practitioner down the block, but everybody got the best you could offer them at that time. And for that, I mean, I was always impressed by that because I've worked for corporate dentistry and it's not always quite like that. And so what made you decide to go that route? And then I'll have a follow-up question. So how did you go that route and how did you develop that model back at a time when nobody was really doing it?
Well, the truth of the matter was, you know, being in the right place at the right time is probably more important than anything else in life. It's, you know, being lucky sometimes is better than being skilled.
That's what they say.
Etc. I didn't go to business school, and I was never taught how to, quote, run an office. I learned on my own through experience and watching other people. Okay, but you asked the question, and the answer was very, very simple. It was 1977, and the Supreme Court of the United States had recently made a decision which permitted legalized advertising for attorneys. And up until then, attorneys could not advertise. And as such, every other profession was locked into that same strict rule that you could not advertise.
Right.
As a matter of fact, in the state of New York, dentists were not permitted to have an illuminated light on their shingle.
Really?
Okay, at night.
So you couldn't shine an actual light on your little white shingle. That's
correct.
And that's unbelievable considering today. And
Yes.
I remember it was a big deal when you had a bold listing in the white pages.
Well, you could always advertise in the yellow pages.
Oh, you could?
Okay, yeah, that you could do. But remember, the yellow pages at that time, Reuben Donnelly was the publisher nationwide. You had to literally buy a space for an entire year because there was only one publication.
I remember.
Yep.
I had to do the same thing in the 90s.
Yeah. The yellow pages came out once a year. That was it. Okay, and you had to reserve your space, etc. And you had to compete with other dentists to get into the yellow pages. But that was about the only way that you could, quote, literally advertise. You couldn't put up a sign. You couldn't take a billboard out. You couldn't advertise on television or radio or what have you.
What about Dad, what about the internet?
I'm sorry. Al Gore hadn't invented it yet.
Oh, don't even go there. But going back just for a second, I'm going to take a sidetrack for just a moment. So you mentioned, you were competing with other dentists. So you stopped practicing many years later. Do you look back at those days and use the word compete kind of in a funny way? Was it really a competition, or was there enough out there for everybody at the time? Because the landscape's changed considerably.
Okay, you have to stop and realize I was practicing within the boundaries of New York City in an area that was predominantly apartment houses, which at that time were, let's say, 6-story elevator buildings that were probably all built right after the Second World War. So it was middle class, and you had virtually a dentist and a physician and a podiatrist, it seemed, on every other corner. Okay, so competition was always good. There was always enough patients to go around. It wasn't that you were competing for the same patients. We all had, quote, neighborhood practices. Some of us lived in that neighborhood, and some of us didn't live in the neighborhood. And, we came to the neighborhood each day to practice. But the point was they were all neighborhood practices. That's what you had.
And insurance didn't exist at the time yet, correct?
Well, it existed to a minor degree. Some of the major employers had medical and dental benefits, but the dental benefits were minimal They were extremely low in terms of max, and they didn't pay for anything other than absolutely essential dentistry, fillings, extractions, etc. People would come in, do you accept my insurance, etc. So I had been introduced to insurance during the late 60s and early 70s. So it was something that I had an inkling about. And my major break really came when I started treating local policemen. And they all were members of the PBA. And I said I would accept their plan. And that's what started me off, really, entering into third-party dentistry. The next step that I found myself in was basically being contacted. I didn't contact them. They contacted me. The dental departments over at 2 or 3 of the big, large insurance companies asked me to come aboard and be one of their consultants. And I was the in-house consultant for Blue Cross and Blue Shield for several years, reviewing claims, etc. And I learned the inside of how it works, what's approvable, what's not, okay, etc. And so I had an inside seat of what was going on in dentistry. And as soon as the 1977 ruling about advertising really came down the pike, I knew that my future was going to be in, quote, socialized dentistry, which was to have large dental facilities hiring other people to work with me and for me, and to see a tremendous amount of patients, and to try to do the best you could. And that was my story.
Pretty amazing. And by the way, I don't want to take too much time on this one, but you said you talked about treating a lot of police officers. You've got to talk about the gentleman who walked into your office in a fur coat and gave you a bag of diamonds.
That's
one of my. I know the whole story cold, but I want them to hear this story because this is one of the stories. In Queens, New York.
No, it wasn't in Queens. It wasn't.
Where was
it? Was not in Queens. It was in the worst possible area of Manhattan at that time. Okay, the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And
sorry to all my Lower East Side brethren who are out there right now.
That was before the East Side, the Lower East Side, which was regentrified. And I remember it as if it were yesterday. It was late. It was like 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. And a man came into the office with 2 beautiful women on his arm, on left arm and right arm, wearing a fur coat. And he asked to see the doctor in charge, the dentist in charge, and that was me. And he was announced. And I asked one of the dental assistants if she would please be kind enough to seat him. I was really almost on my way out of the office. And introduced himself to me just as somebody else, my name is so-and-so. Fine. I said, well, why don't you take a seat? And he took out of his pocket a jeweler's velvet case. Many jewelers carry their diamonds in these little cases, and they put it in their pocket and what have you. And he took this out, and I remember that the velvet case was blue. And he opened it up, and he poured out on the bracket table, a whole bunch of diamonds. They were all little baguettes, etc. And he said, I want you to make me crowns for my front teeth, and I want each one to have a diamond. Can you do that? And I didn't want to laugh, because it was, how many patients will ever come into your practice with that kind of request? I didn't laugh. And I looked at him very seriously, really holding back as best I could. And I said to him, I'm not sure I can do this. I've never done this before. I said, but I'd like to have at least the day to think this over and see if I can come up with a treatment plan. And he said, okay, fine. I said, I need x-rays. He said, I don't have a problem. Proceeded, took a set of x-rays, took a Panorex at that time already. And then I went over to my senior partner. I was still working for Ralph Berger at the time. And I said to him, I have a patient, and I told him who the patient was. I gave him the name, and he looked at me. He said, are you out of your mind? I said, why do you say that? He said, do you know who that is? And I said, no, I haven't the slightest. He says, that's one of the real gangsters down here on the Lower East Side. You really want to get involved in that? So I said, if the price is right and he really needs it and he really wants it, I'd love to have that opportunity. And Ralph said, if you want to do it and you have the technician, but don't come to me and don't send them to me. That's what he said.
Wow. I never heard that part before. I only heard when you went to your jeweler and asked him if he could set a diamond into the crown. That's where my story started.
I had a technician at the time who was fabulous. A little wacky, but he was fabulous. Great hands. You may remember him. You were a little boy at the time. Okay. He was from Yugoslavia originally. He was a dentist from Yugoslavia who had magnificent hands. Okay. He could do anything. He could do such beautiful work. And he followed me from that previous job that I had with that assistant head of prosthodontics. Okay. He was his technician, and he followed me wherever I went for the first couple of years. And I called him up and I said, Joe, did you ever make crowns that had diamonds on the facial aspect? And he said, no. He said, but I'd like to try. I said, fine. I said, do you have a jeweler that you can work with to have a setting? He said, yeah. I said, I have to discuss with you the preparations. I said, and we have to discuss how we're going to actually have these castings and settings so they don't become too bulky and start cutting the inside of the guy's, lip and cheek and what have you. And it was a terrific opportunity. And Joe did a magnificent job, and the patient was extremely pleased, and Ralph got his money, and everybody was happy at the end of the day.
Didn't he like snap his fingers or something, and someone behind him rolled out $100 bills?
Oh, well, he was a kingpin. He was one of, as a matter of fact, there was a movie made years later with Denzel Washington, and he was a character in that movie by name. I don't remember who played him, but that was him. And
right, a known cop killer, right? I think he was on a wanted list.
He wasn't per se on the wanted list, otherwise he would have been arrested. But he was known to be, let's put it this way, he wasn't one of the choir boys. Okay,
it's a great story.
Anyway,
I love that story. So, and it was a different era for you back then, right? Things were just different. But tell me just a little bit when, nowadays we have a lot of general dentists who really bite off everything. They want to do everything. And they always say, I'm doing it because it's in the patient's best interest for me to do this, right? Because they don't want to go see a specialist. So I'm going to do braces. I'm going to do Invisalign. I'm going to do everything myself. I never asked you this. Did you ever do any form of braces at all? Or did everything go to the orthodontist that I knew?
The truth of the matter was, you remember the offices, I hired orthodontists, okay?
Yeah.
Whether it was Felix, actually Felix wasn't the first one. We had, I don't remember his name anymore. But in any case, the answer to your question is, I did minor orthodontic therapy. I did minor tooth movement myself, jumping laterals, that were interior to get them out to be in line with the other teeth. Kids who are 8, 9 years old, etc. That was the orthodontic therapy that I did. I never did a full case of ortho.
Okay.
We weren't trained to do it. Okay, we took didactic classes, but never clinical. Okay,
Right.
Temple University didn't believe in teaching their dental students clinical orthodontic therapy. We were taught didactic orthodontics. So if you felt that you were capable of taking that knowledge and actually putting it, to work at a chair, great. None of my classmates that I can ever remember did any ortho in dental school.
Did you routinely see patients coming back with tons of decay, or did they come back? There wasn't fluoride wasn't a widespread thing at that point, correct?
Not true. Not true. It was
In the 60s?
Fluoride. First of all, remember that New York City had fluoride starting back in the 1950s.
Right.
Okay.
I keep forgetting you're practicing in New York City, which
the
had
New
fluoride.
York City practice, I saw very little decay, okay, relative to orthodontic therapy. Okay, I saw much more decay later on when I was practicing in areas that didn't have fluoridated water. Okay, number one. Number two, I had a bugaboo when I was practicing with regard to the relationships that I established with orthodontists. Okay, namely, I didn't realize at the time that these gentlemen and ladies had their own practice problems with their patients in terms of maintenance, okay, and that they were not anxious to remove a full case so that the patient could come back to me and I could get an adequate set of x-rays and do a real good prophy, etc. And so the answer to your question is that after 3 years, a patient came to me and the braces were now taken off. I mean, I saw all kinds of really problems that presented difficult follow-up from me, the general dentist. And, the last thing we'd ever want to do is put blame on somebody, because it's not the dentist's fault. It's not the orthodontist's fault in reality. But we don't live in a perfect world. Okay. And unfortunately, an orthodontist has an obligation to his patient. And sometimes that obligation, okay, includes the fact that they have a problem getting the patient to understand adequate home care.
Amen.
We had electric toothbrushes back then.
Did you have to plug them into the wall?
Yes, you had to plug them in.
I know.
That's correct. Do you remember that?
I remember
Squibb. Squibb made an electric brush. That's right.
I mean, tell somebody today, here's your toothbrush, and you have
plugged in. Plugged in. That's correct. With all the water running and everything else. You're absolutely right.
It's totally safe to have a complete plugged-in toothbrush stuck in your mouth. Nothing dangerous about that at all.
Nothing at all.
But before we finish up today, because we've been going for a little while, I'm going to ask you one question in general, and then I'm going to ask you a few others. But the first question is, in your body of working for 45 years, you've accomplished a lot of pretty amazing things, like I said. What advice, if I was now, you don't really know the ortho field other than what you've learned from me in terms of the business side per se, because it's a totally different animal. But if you were a young orthodontist listening to this podcast right now, and you're out there, what advice would you give to somebody who is starting out in life as a clinician? What one big moral or lesson would you give them?
It's a tough question.
I know. I'm sorry for ambushing you with that.
I would hope that any young professional would have the patience to take everything in without emoting. In other words, don't lose your cool. Don't panic. You have the training behind you. All you have to do is just stop and think about the case in front of you. or the situation, and you'll come up with the right answer. And that's what I would try to convey to don't lose faith, okay? Plain and simple. It takes time to build a practice, okay? And you do it each patient at a time.
Yeah, that's great advice. I love that. And that's the way I've tried to practice. So thank you for that lesson. And now, my favorite time where I'm going to ask you, for those out there who don't realize it, if you spend an hour with me at a bar, a restaurant, a meeting, invariably there will probably be 50 movie line references at some point, just the way my brain works. And that's my father's fault, because growing up, from the time I was a little boy, we had movie reels that in the basement. We'd watch these little movies of little Abbott and Costellos or Three Stooges or whatever. And then, the VCR came out, and we'd watch, Willy Wonka and all the other things. And we were always some of our best times are just laughing, watching movies, and we can giggle all the time thinking about it. But so you'll appreciate, I'm about to ask you the same 10 questions I ask everybody on my podcast. You remember the 10 questions that James Lipton asked all of the people inside the actor studio?
Well, I don't remember the 10 questions, but I remember the actor studio. Yes.
Yes, I'm going to ask you those 10 questions, and I'm going to do them in the voice of, what's his name? From Moses, from the Ten Commandments. What's his name?
Charlton Heston.
No, the other one who had Edward G. Robinson, who played Pharaoh, right? Or
no, he didn't. He didn't. But go ahead.
I'll talk to you. I'll raise the questions like this.
Yes.
So here, joking aside, he always asks 10 questions at the end, and they were always the same 10 questions, and I'm going to ask them to you. So I'll be curious because, I've never asked you this because these are not questions you ever ask your dad. So I'll be curious, but here you go. What's your favorite word?
Favorite word.
And everybody's listening.
Yes. My favorite word is hello.
It's a good word. And you certainly say hello to a lot of people. And I mean that in a good way, not a bad one. You always taught me, go up to people and say hi. Just don't stand there and let them walk by.
Right.
What's your least favorite word?
Hate.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
God.
I like that. What turns you off?
Pain.
Emotional? I guess, what? Pain. That's good enough. Now, here's one that's a little uncomfortable for me to ask, but I have to ask because there's 10 questions. What is your favorite curse word, Dad? Words I swore would never come out of my mouth in my lifetime. What is your favorite? And you can go, I never say this to anybody, but you can go as tame as you want. You can say darn, and I'm okay with it.
No.
But what's your favorite curse word, Dad?
Dumbass. Yeah.
Dumbass. I like that. That's a good one. What sound or noise do you love?
The ocean. Lapping against the shore.
We talked about that last
Yes,
weekend
we
when we
did.
were sitting down on the beach. Yeah, and you said I need to get out here more often. And just for everybody out there, my mother is alive and well. She's good. We haven't spoken about her here. Amazing woman. She has her own story. Maybe one day we'll get her on because her story mimics mine. She went back to school at a later age, and she showed me that you can do that without any problems.
With children. That's right.
Let's go on. With children, exactly. She went back to school with 2 kids, almost the exact same age that my 3 kids were when I went back to school. What sound or noise do you hate?
Blackboard scratching.
Ooh, everybody back out there just sort of cringed. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Law.
Law? You'd like to
Yes.
practice law? I never
Yes.
saw that coming. Wow. Like Perry Mason standing in front of a jury or...
Love it.
Or, interesting. I never would have guessed that. What profession would you not want to do?
Profession, not vocation.
Yeah, well,
Profession.
whatever you want. You make it whatever you want. What profession, vocation would you not want to do?
Coal miner.
I don't disagree. And the last question, if heaven exists, which I know you believe it does, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
We weren't expecting you.
That's not good. But it's funny. I like that.
Right.
So I love our conversations, and I'm glad we got to get this one down for posterity's sake. I really enjoyed my time here with you, and it's going to create so many follow-up questions for me. And I don't know if the people out there can appreciate what kind of a treat this was for me, because this is the first time we've ever really done anything like this. And I remember when you sat with your father with a tape recorder and asked him questions about his life, and not professionally. And there's so many more questions we've talked about not related to professionally, but you and your dad didn't have a professional relationship. I worked for you for a short period of time with you. And, but it was nice to remember when you asked Grandpa all those questions on tape so we could hear his responses years later.
Yes.
I'm really thrilled we had
But
a
it was
chance to do
totally,
this, so.
totally different. That was really biography more than anything else.
Yeah.
This is
Just a little insight.
So I hope that your listeners have gained some insight, and hopefully they'll skip over the little hurdles that I experienced and you experienced, and we'll have a wonderful, wonderful career, enjoyable and also prosperous.
Yeah, amen. And I would say, even with the hurdles, if you could be a dentist again, would you do it?
Yes, I would. I enjoyed practicing dentistry. I enjoyed the patients that I met over the years, the majority of them at least, and I felt good about the fact that I was able to help, and that gave me the biggest feeling of joy. Okay, that I was doing something constructive, helping another human being.
Yeah, and best of all for me is you being a dentist inspired me to become a dentist. So I have that to thank you for. And so,
well, I told you to go to the other school.
yeah, you did.
I told you don't go to that door, go to the next one. But
Yeah.
okay, but you did right.
It worked out pretty
Yeah.
well. And so, thank you for everything you've done for me. I have so much love for you and for Mom, for all the kindness and support you've given me in my life. And I'm just really beyond thankful that we had the opportunity to spend this time together. So,
And I'm so glad that I was interviewed.
yeah.
Anyway, we will talk again, and I thank you so much. And I'm going to sign off at this point, okay?
But before you sign off, I want to say to you what I don't get to say to any of my podcast guests, Dad.
Yes.
I love you, Dad.
Thank you, and I love you back.
You see, not every podcast gets that. It was really a pleasure. And to everybody out there, I just want to say thank you for listening in. And if you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to me. And just as my father said, don't let the hurdles get in your way. Keep moving past it. Life is amazing, and being a dental care professional is an amazing place for us to be. So until next time, wishing you all the best.